This is where architecture starts, the drafting table and the blank page. The architect poised in contemplation, his pause, his hesitation, the slight paralysis that comes as a pencil hovers above a pristine white page, anticipating the first mark, the first commitment of idea to paper, when the imagination of the mind finally makes its mark in the physical world. Or so goes one of the many myths about architecture. As a designer, the blank page is both seductive and terrifying. It has come to represent the complete freedom to design something from nothing, but when you're face to face with it, it often just feels terrifying. The myth of the blank page can be hard to shake, so it's important to remember that sometimes a blank page is just a blank page. It is not the beginning, and design should never really start from nothing. In my experience, believing that it does often leads to the design of empty objects to fill the empty space. When I was studying architecture, I came across this concept. Place is a practiced space. The quote is from The Everyday Life by Michel de Certeau. It's often translated the other way around, but for the sake of clarity, this translation refers to space and place the way we typically do. So space is just an abstract location on a map, whereas place is our lived experience. It's the difference between a plan and a narrative. Now, the myth of the blank page can extend to other ways that we look at our cities and our starting points for design. Maps and statistics, forms and architectural style, dates and dimensions. These are all ways of looking from a privileged but removed point of view that de Certeau associates with spaces. I'm far more interested in the social practices of space and how they create and perpetuate culture and community, traditions and rituals, the things that can turn space into place. Now, I have a hard time coming up with a description of what I do and a harder time coming up with the appropriate title. I've tried architectural theorist and theoretical architect. I've even tried architectural theorist / theoretical architect. A couple of years ago, I was at a party and I bumped into a former classmate. He asked what I was doing, and I kind of awkwardly admitted that I was unemployed. He leaned in and he said, "I like to just tell people I'm an artist." In my mind, I can picture a movie montage of myself at networking events and parties like that one, and on first dates. And I see this series of people asking me, "So, what do you do?" I then respond with one of these many titles. I then see a series of very confused looks as people look at me and say, "So, what do you do?" I studied architecture, but I'm not a practicing architect. I am, however, practicing architecture. I don't want to just design spaces, though I really do enjoy it. I want to help to create meaningful places. And for me, that means finding ways to practice space, both through design and architecture, and through cultural research and theory. So before I heard of Michel de Certeau, and before I was studying architecture, I was practicing space. When I was about 8, I came home from Hebrew school really excited. I had just learned about Sukkah, which is the Jewish harvest festival. It's traditionally celebrated by building a sukkah. It's a temporary dwelling for the harvest. My family had never built one before, so I went into our backyard and I collected some branches and some twigs, and I built my very first sukkah. Now, it wasn't exactly to code. It was roughly big enough that I could lie down on the ground and shuffle my way back in to cover my head and my shoulders. But it was good practice. And every fall, I was in the backyard collecting more branches, improving the design and my construction techniques. And soon it was big enough that I could huddle inside. I'm about 10 in this photo, so it's probably my 3rd sukkah. My mom started to help, became a mother-daughter tradition. And then by the time I was 13, we're at full scale with a dining table ready to host the holiday dinner. Now, I'm not going to claim that this was the moment I knew I wanted to be an architect, or that I fully was conscious of what it meant to participate in this tradition. I probably just thought it was fun to build something. But I do believe there is something about the particular practice of building a sukkah, and I think that's why I came back to it in grad school. The sukkah through my studies of the sukkah and other spatial traditions of the Jewish diaspora, I connected with the placemaking ability of traditions that bring practice to space. The sukkah connected me to my culture and to my family, and it connected me to an ancient tradition that celebrates the marking of time and the marking of space. The sukkah is a stunningly elegant archetype for the practice of space and the perpetual recreation of place. As architecture, it's just a temporary and simple structure, but as architectural practice, it's rich with depth and meaning, and it has lasted for millennia. The 12th century philosopher Maimonides writes, "One should regard his house as a temporary home, and the sukkah as his permanent home." I love this idea that the practice, which we might normally think of as temporary, is really eternal, whereas the stable object is actually fleeting. So part of what makes the sukkah such a successful practice is its incredible ability to adapt, to be practiced anywhere, and to turn anywhere into somewhere. It's interesting to see how an agrarian tradition has been adapted to the urban context. So the space might not even be a plot of land. It can be precariously perched to a balcony in New York City or in Israel. It might be floating in the canal in Venice. Or you could just pack it up to go on a bicycle. I'm fascinated by this transient and translatable tradition and how it transforms anywhere into somewhere. And I want to test architecture's ability to initiate this intersection between space, place, and practice. So I'd like to start by investigating how some of these ideas have translated and informed my own work, first with a theoretical project for a bookmobile. In this experiment, the relationship between architecture and the space it occupies would be challenged. The goal was to create a place-making practice. I wanted to design a project that would temporarily appropriate space and bring practice to it in a meaningful way. So to really test the idea of turning space into place, I wanted to start with an otherwise unpracticed space. Somewhere neutral and redundant, with consistent dimensions that could be found almost anywhere. And this led me to parking space. So the bookmobile wanders until it comes across 3 on-street parking spaces in an adjacent lane. It then transforms one of those parking spaces into a temporary parklet and a docking station, and installs docking posts along the sidewalk. Like a circus or fair, the bookmobile can be deployed, packed up, moved, and redeployed almost anywhere. And like sukkah, it combines the event practice with the building practice. And like a fairground, the parking space returns to non-practiced space as soon as the event departs. But now through that parklet and the docking posts, it contains a trace and memory of the event, which allows us to anticipate its return. I think that one's out of order. I think what's interesting is that not only is the space dependent on the bookmobile is dependent on the space. They come together through practice and temporarily achieve the status of place. When it's carted up on the road, neither the bookmobile nor the parking space are truly places. So as a theoretical project, I think the bookmobile demonstrates the value in practicing architecture in space, and that the value is not in the architectural object or in the space. It draws meaning from the event and from the shared experience and locates it in a particular place at a particular time. So sharing experience in a shared space is a recurring theme in a number of my projects. I had my theory of practicing space and turning it into place. Now and I had a couple of theoretical projects, so now I wanted to test the theory. Now, purchasing and converting a transport truck is a bit beyond my means. So I figured I should start somewhere a bit more modest and manageable. In 2011, I partnered with a couple of friends interested in investigating the idea of play in the city. We had 2 principal goals, play and place. How could we use play to bring attention to and initiate an experience with the non-place spaces we pass through every day? Play is a fundamental interaction between space, people, and objects. So could we use play to design a project that would, or to design minimal interventions that brought just enough practice to space, turn it into place? We set out to design a series of impromptu playgrounds. That would become the name for our group. The first round was a very simple premise. Insert recognizable play objects in the everyday spaces and see how people react. Now, we like the idea of the juxtaposition between play and work. So we started off by looking at the office district in downtown Ottawa. These are busy people. Can we get them to stop and play? So what if we look at not only empty spaces, but at empty time, like waiting for the bus at a bus stop? Over the course of a couple of nights, we secretly installed swings in a handful of transitway stations and stenciled hopscotches nearby. Now we kind of figured that the objects themselves were not going to be enough motivation for people, so we also included the slogan, "Pause and play in the hopscotch," and we included these little stickers to indicate that play was permitted next to the swings. Unfortunately, the swings were promptly removed and the hopscotches washed away. But we did have the opportunity to observe a couple of early morning commuters. Most seemed not to notice or to be kind of annoyed as they pushed it away. There was the occasional double take and smile. A couple of people stopped to tug on the rope or press on the seat. Very few people actually sat down to swing. And our spies overheard quite a few conversations. People were asking, where did it come from? Do you think it's safe? Do you think OC Transpo put it here? Well, they must have, because there is a sticker. And my favorite story is of this especially entrepreneurial homeless fellow who was charging people $1 to sit in his relaxation swing. Now, this first experiment set us up nicely to participate in Parking Day a month later. Parking Day is an annual open source event that brings designers and community groups together to temporarily appropriate on-street parking space and turn it into a temporary parkland. The idea was initiated in 2005 by the design studio Rebar. Now, it wasn't my bookmobile, but it was a chance to return to my placeless parking space and see if we could design a project that would turn it into place. As Rebar explains in their manifesto, on-street parking spaces are niche spaces that are undervalued or valued inappropriately for the range of potential activities within them. Parking Day is an opportunity for us to reinvestigate this pretty staggering amount of public space that is essentially appropriated for the temporary storage of private vehicles. So our Parking Day parklet wasn't anything especially complicated. We paid the parking meter, and we rolled out carpet with a hopscotch. We hacked together some gates and benches from some IKEA furniture and added a couple of potted plants. Now, from our transitway scenario, we kind of figured that people need more than just a subtle hint. So we also printed up postcards and included a description of the project. Impromptu Playground reintegrates play into urban space and daily life. Play doesn't remind you of when you were once a child. It reminds you that you still are. So pause and play. You know you want to. Now, we were unsure how the city or bylaw officials might respond to our project. So we were ready to pack up and move as necessary, every 2 hours if you want to follow the parking regulations. So when we saw a couple of bylaw officers walking our way, we got a little bit nervous. They came up and asked if the project was ours. And we decided to say yes. They then smiled, gave us the big thumbs up. They said it was the best thing they ever saw on their daily walk. And then as they went to leave, they finally noticed our displayed parking pass, and they burst out laughing. Now, as dinner time approached in the market, we definitely got a couple of angry glares from drivers as they were looking for a parking spot. And there was a bit of skepticism from some people who stopped to talk to us. They kept asking, but what are you selling? But overall, there was just this joy and lightheartedness that you felt from people as they walked by, whether or not they paused to play. So the following year, the rest of the Impromptu Playground team were not available for Parking Day, but I wanted to continue the experiment. So as I was brainstorming ideas of what I could design for this space, it occurred to me that maybe that was the interesting concept for the idea for the project that year. Part of what makes Parking Day really interesting is the public discussion it creates about public space. And I wanted to continue that discussion and engage more people with it. So I printed up these parking signs, and I posted them near on-street parking in Centertown and the Byward Market. The sign offered the statement, "This parking space could be," and then offered several ways to contribute ideas. There was a Sharpie attached to the sign. There was a Twitter account and a site-specific hashtag to tweet to, a WordPress blog, and an editable Google map. It was also a chance for me to engage with another one of my interests, which is this crowdsourcing and Creative Commons, the virtual side of community building. So I thought it was kind of interesting to bring together a spaceless community over community-less spaces. The blog outlines some details. Ottawa has 3,938 paid on-street parking spaces. The average on-street parking space is 2.75 by 7.25 meters. That is a lot of streetscape dedicated to parked cars. And mind you, that is only paid on-street parking. That's not free on-street parking or parking lots. So surely we can think of things that are more interesting, productive, friendly, inviting, sustainable, beautiful, useful, more anything than a parked car. Every couple of days, I hopped on a Bixie and I did the rounds, and I took pictures of all of the signs, and I noted which ones had been taken down. There were some interesting suggestions and some pretty standard ones. There was a bandstand, parklets, wider sidewalks, bicycle parking. There were a couple of wacky ones. There was a Ferris wheel and a cozy couch for kittens. And then there are the parking enthusiasts who really hate it when you challenge parking space. So this one's my favorite, a parking spot. P.S. Thanks for the Sharpie. So I think it's interesting that in my aversion to the blank page, I seem to be drawn to these blank spaces. The neutral, placeless spaces. Spaces between the buildings and the undervalued spaces that are just dying to be appropriated and activated. Parking spaces and transitway stops. And I have a growing wish list of other spaces I would love to practice. Office cubicles, balconies, front lawns. Now, I started my talk by explaining that I don't believe in the mythical starting point of the blank page. I also don't believe that architecture is ever really finished. And so I see my practice as an experiment with ways to re-envision and narrate the city, and to re-engage with people and traditions. I half-jokingly tell people that I love architecture too much to be an architect, but I do want to continue practicing architecture, and that means finding ways to practice space. Thank you.